So now that TNT is installed, before we actually show some examples of using it, let's talk about that formality that we were mentioning earlier a little bit and show you what I meant by that. Let's go click on Mask Project. So now we're back to that front page with the three repos. Look up here, see how it says projects. There's one project, click on that, and we have mask node. This project is linked to both node and cluster tool. So click on this, and now you see our card wall. So I want to talk a little bit about our card wall and how it works for folks who are part of the mask project. It has several columns. This is the new column. All new cards, every single new card, always goes in the new column. Backlog is cards that we have. You'll notice there's 63 cards in here. New, there's 20 cards in new. There's 63 in backlog. Just to run through them very quickly. You can probably freeze frame and see all these. I don't really want to get into all that's here. Backlog are cards that we're going to do at some point in the world. We're probably going to do at some point in the future. It could be that sometime between now and then we'll decide not to do those cards, but probably we're going to do these cards. However, we can't do them right now for some reason. There's something we need to do first. Some other card needs to be done first, or there's some design work to be done, or they don't have good testing plans, or somehow they're not quite ready to be started on. That's why they're in backlog. Ready for development are cards, again, that we're going to get to, or probably going to get to at some point. These cards are ready to go right now. There's no reason why we couldn't just pick any of these cards in this column and just get started on them. The only reason we don't is because they're not at the top of the priority list. This column, awaiting development, it's empty right now. This isn't a real good example. The reason it's empty right now is because I'm doing this on Thanksgiving Day. So the holidays are upon us, and we're not keeping this full the way we should. This should always have a few cards in it. How many cards? It should have about as many cards as it takes to do in an iteration, maybe plus one or two. In other words, enough to keep us busy. And the cards in this column should absolutely, the order matters. The one at the top is the highest priority. The next one is the second highest priority. So if you're a developer and you're on the mask project, then when you finish a card, you come to this column and you take the top one. You don't have an option to skip the top one and take the next one. You always take the top one, because it's the most important. Dev in progress, prepare testing demo. That's what we're doing right now. That's this card. This card is in progress. There's only one card in progress because right now there's only one developer. That's me. So you'll notice that this one actually has a name on it. None of these others should. Wait a minute. Actually, this doesn't have a name on it. It was opened by me, but it should also be assigned to me. You should see a little picture of me here. I have to fix that. Assigned to me because I pulled it into this column, and I'm currently working on it, as you can see, because you're watching this video and stuff. Well, actually, once you're watching this video, this card won't be here anymore. Anyway, once this is done, then it goes into this awaiting review column where somebody connected with the mask project will pull it out of here and review it, and either put it back if it doesn't pass review, or it'll go in here if it's being reviewed, and it'll either go back if it doesn't pass, or it'll go forward if it does pass. And here's where you guys come in. Once it's in here, once it's in this column, awaiting quality quality assurance, then one of you, hopefully, will notice that it's in there, pull it, put your name on it, and put it here in quality assurance in progress. You'll notice this column is empty because right now, as I'm making this video, we don't have any testers. One of the reasons I'm making this video is so that hopefully we can get some testers. And you'll check that card out and test it and make sure that the change that card implies is actually, is actually in place and working. And if you find a problem with it, you'll move it back. Exactly where you'll move it back to, we'll talk about later. And if it's good, if everything's fine with it, then you'll move it here, and it will actually go into production, into the production branch. And done this iteration, there's a number of cards that are done. And later we're going to be showing how to test one of these cards. Now, these cards have actually not run through tests because, well, not run through QA tests because we don't have any QA people, and that's not a good thing. Hopefully, soon after this video is released, we will have a stable of QA people who will be able to justifiably put cards in this column that we are confident work and do what they're supposed to do. Right now, these cards have all been tested just by developers, which is not ideal. Hopefully we can make that better. So that's how the card wall works. More specifics about that have to, well, the meeting, the card wall is modified. Usually the card wall is modified by meetings, or at least the beginning part of it here is modified by meetings. And the meeting that does the most is the grooming meeting. At least once an iteration is 2 weeks, at least once an iteration we have a grooming meeting, which is generally on Zoom. So you'll, if you want to participate in the grooming meeting, you'll want to install Zoom on your machine, and you'll get an invitation from Kaori Hero, and wind up in your Zoom meeting. And a grooming meeting consists of 3 parts. The first part is that we take all the cards that have accumulated in new since the last grooming meeting, and we move all of them either to backlog or to ready for development. That's the first part, and always we completely empty the new column. So a card in the new column goes into backlog if it can't be started on right now. If there's something that it's waiting for, if it's like too big and needs to be split up, or if it's like waiting on, so it needs a license for something and we don't have the license yet, so it'll go in backlog until it gets the license, or if it doesn't have a decent test plan and the test plan isn't one that can be stuck on, it's not short enough that it can be stuck on during the grooming meeting, it'll go in backlog until it can get that, or whatever. It'll go into backlog if it can't be started on immediately. And if it can be started on immediately, then it goes right into ready for development. So that's the first part of the grooming meeting. From new, basically the first part is emptying the new column. So once the new column is empty, we go on to the second part of the grooming meeting, which is taking ready for development and moving into awaiting development. So this is mostly the product owner's responsibility. This is Kaori Hero is going to do a lot of this. We go down ready for development and pick out the cards that we want to prioritize next, sort of as a group, a big hunk of cards that, well, not necessarily a hunk, but several cards anyway, that we know we want to work on next, the next bite of work, and stick it in awaiting development. And presumably at some point on his own time, Kaori Hero will arrange the cards in this column in priority order, so the most important ones at the top and so on. But that's the second part of the grooming meeting. We take a few cards from here and put them in here, enough cards so that we we have enough work to do to take us through the next grooming meeting when we'll have more stuff here. And then the third part, if we still have time, the third part of the grooming meeting is going through the backlog cards and figuring out which ones of them have that we all of them in here will have something that needs to be done before they can go and ready for development. And the next part of the grooming meeting is picking the ones picking the low-hanging fruit out of backlog and doing whatever has to be done to these to put them in ready for development. And usually the grooming meeting will have a specific time that it ends. Especially for masq, where people are going to be all over the world, and some people are going to be on really late at night, and others really early in the morning, and we can't, we want to really respect people's schedules and so on. So the third part of the grooming meeting is we'll move cards out of backlog until the grooming meeting is over. However many cards we get out in that time, that's what we do. So that's a grooming meeting. Moving stuff around in these first, 3 columns? 4 columns. Moving stuff around in the first 4 columns of the table, of the card wall. There will also be, intermittent design meetings, and mostly the design meetings will be developers. But we probably will need at least one testing person, one QA person in each of our design meetings. The purpose of a design meeting is exclusively to move cards from backlog to ready for development. Cards that need enough work that it takes a special meeting to do that work to get them over. And some of the, whether it's done in a design meeting or whether it's done in a grooming meeting, one of the things that all these cards are going to need in order to get from backlog to ready for development is some kind of a test plan. And by a test plan, I mean, once the card is finished, the tester needs to be able, the QA tester needs to be able to tell whether the additional functionality in the card works or not. If there's no way to do that, then the card shouldn't make it from backlog to ready for development. If somebody tries to take it out of backlog and put it in ready for development, a tester should stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, no, you can't do that because I can't tell. Once you do that, based on what it looks like right now, I can't tell whether it works or not. You got to redesign this card so that we can test it once it's done. And so then it gets modified, and maybe it turns out that testing is figuring out how to test it is a hard problem, and so we need to think about it for a while. Or maybe it's pretty easy, and we can just quickly dash off a test plan for it. And in some cases, it could be that testing it is either trivial or not necessary. For example, if it's a documentation card, it could be that just a review is enough, and it doesn't. I mean, how do you test documentation? I suppose you could say, well, I read it and see if I understand it. Well, yeah, but that's kind of review. So some of these cards will specifically not have testing plans, but you don't want a card to accidentally not have a testing plan. You want to make sure that you do that on purpose if you do it. So that's the formality that we need to make sure that when a card gets to here, quality assurance in progress, that whoever picks it up actually knows what to do. Because figuring out what to do from the contents of, well, let's just pick a card. One of these guys, like this one, for example. Show more. Currently, the node can migrate data from older versions of the node to current versions, and to a limited degree, data from newer versions of the node to current versions as well. Just sort of read this. How would you test this? Modify the node so if it comes up and finds a database whose schema version is older than current schema, you probably, as a tester, you read this and you don't really know what it's talking about. And the reason you don't know what it's talking about is because you're the kind of person we want. In other words, not a masq developer. If you were a masq developer, this would make all sorts of sense to you. But if you're not a masq developer, this is probably reasonably opaque. So as a tester, if somebody tries to move this card to ready for development, you should object and say, hey, wait a minute, this is not clear. I don't know how to test this. Add some stuff here that is a test plan, or explain to me exactly what this means, and I'll put in the information to say how to test it. But you can't, as a QA person, you can't depend on developers to be able to do that for you so that you understand it. I mean, we'll try, we'll do our best, but we're not testers. And so that's why we need testers in our meetings, so that you guys can stand up for yourselves and say, hey, thanks for what you did, but it's not enough. You need more. So that by the time it gets to the place where it needs to be tested, you can test it. One other thing that I should point out is that by the time it gets to, well, actually, no, I think I'm going to wait on that because I think I've got an example of it coming up. So I think that's it for the card wall. Next, I think I want to take a look at pipelines.